Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said could be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. Or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. How's it going tonight?
Well, so actually I'm having a bit of marital problems, and I need you to tell me that I'm right and my wife is wrong. You ready?
It depends if she's listening.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. So here's what happened. My house was built in the 1960s. And I think that they just didn't I think construction and engineering wasn't up to spec back then. I don't think they took security as seriously then as they take it probably now. Because when I walk around data centers that are built in 2026, all of the network operation centers have fobbed access to them. And I went to put access control fobbed access in my network operation center. And all of a sudden, I'm hearing things like, I don't feel like I want to carry a key fob or an access credential around my own house to get into the laundry room. I don't even know why she calls our network operation center the laundry room. Just because they happen to co-locate the washing machine and the dryer, which is a terrible location. I don't know. I just don't think the houses were built as well back then. I think is the problem. But in any event, that's what I'm facing is that we're at an impasse, and I think where the compromise is going to be is she's going to let me put access control in, but it has to be like a pin pad to enter a code. It can't be like a proximity thing. I mean, it could be both, but it has to include the keypad thing.
So I mean, you could do what we did at my house. If you remember, that thing has a thumbprint reader, and Rosanna really likes that. Or you could just get her one of those fancy rings like you have, and then she doesn't have to carry it around. She just always has it around.
So we looked at that. There's a couple things. The women's rings are not like, they don't make like a small, like dainty version of the ring that I have because, you got to be able to fit the computer chip in there. So you'll love this. This is right hand to God. This is an honest conversation I had. So I go onto the internet, and the chip that is in that ring is known as a T5577 chip. And I went to look surely somebody makes a smaller version of a T5577 chip. And lo and behold, I come across a site called dangerousthings.com. And dangerousthings.com has what's known as the Next chip. The Next chip, you're going to love this, Steve. It's right up your alley. It is a implantable RFID chip. And because it's not actually medically approved to implant inside of your body, they've partnered with tattoo shops and body modification shops. You can find one near you, and they'll ship you everything you need to do it yourself and or take it to one of these partners, and they'll help you cut a hole in your body and shove this chip in it. And, well, that was the route I was pursuing, but I'll be honest with you, Steve, I haven't gotten a warm reception.
Well, make a partnership with something she does like. Maybe she likes sewing. Have her go into the local sewing place, and maybe they'll just sew it on the outside, and that'll be okay.
Must be. But so anyway, things that came to my attention. One is this company called Dangerous Things, which, all joking aside, I actually think it's kind of cool. I think it's cool that there is a company out there that makes these things. I think it's cool that they are doing something that might be considered a little taboo by way of, do you really want to inject a thing inside of your body? But they're continuing to make it, and kudos to them for partnering with places that will help you do it if you're not brave enough to cut a hole in your body and shove this thing in, which I can understand because I'll be honest with you, I wasn't signing up for that. I did find that they do make a little white ring that has a 5577 chip in it. So maybe that'll be the thing. But I thought as a fellow person who has to seek the spousal approval factor that you would relate and empathize with me.
That's wild, man. I had no idea that you were having this much security problem with your knock.
It's right. Yeah, I'm saying. So it's the next two. You can check it out by going to dangerousthings.com, click on their implants, and then click on Next V2. The Next V1, a little bit smaller. Both are based off of that 5577 chip. The Next V2 has a little flashable LED, so your hand can glow. How cool is that? You want to do some feedback?
Let's do it.
Our first email comes in today from Jason. Jason writes in and he says, "Hello, Noah and Steve. I have a garage with a heater and the usual dumb thermostat. I have a temperature sensor sending data to Home Assistant, and I found that there are some really cold days when I could be adjusting the thermostat down to be more efficient. Does anyone have a recommendation for a Home Assistant or MQTT friendly smart thermostat that would work well with a garage heater? Thanks for the helpful show, Jason." So, Steve, you kind of have fallen into an approach of dealing with HVAC, and I'll be honest with you, a lot of what I'm seeing with what you're doing is also what I'm seeing the big boys at Johnson Controls and Honeywell doing inside of new modern buildings, and so I think there's some wisdom in your approach. Tell me about it.
So I use multiple sensors in order to determine the temperature in a place. So first I'll start with what I do in the garage and why I do it that way. So I've decided to leave the dumb thermostat in place in the garage. And what happens is I put the heating unit on a smart plug. Now, make sure if you're going to go this route that your heating unit does not pull more amperage than your smart plug can handle, whether it's a Shelly or otherwise, right? So I couldn't do this for my dryer, for example, because it pulls too much amperage. Having said that, I have a temperature sensor in the garage as well. And I also have contact sensors on the doors. And part of the reason why I went this route is there's a couple of things that happen, at least in my garage. So we'll start with this, right? When the heater is on, if I turn the thermostat down while the heater is running, it's still going to run through its cycle. That's something that I have noticed. It doesn't immediately cut the power. And so in the event of like the double garage door opening or, somebody leaving the back door open, it's just going to continue to pump heat out. And so my approach has been there's the temperature sensor is in a different location than the thermostat. It's centrally placed in the garage, and the garage heater is on a smart plug so that if one of the contact sensors is open, it cuts the power to the heater, which also, by the way, cuts the power to the thermostat. So the thermostat blanks out. And that came about because one night I accidentally heated all of the outdoors for the entire night.
Oh,
that was terrible. Yeah.
Did you figure it out right away, or was it more like you woke up and then got the bill from the heating company?
No, I woke up and went outside and realized that the garage heater had been on all night because double garage door was open. So that was a whoopsie. And so the pendulum effect for that is if the garage door is open, cut the power. Then I'm not going to heat the outside. I have a different problem if, I leave the door open all night and it freezes in there, but at least I'm not going to be heating the outside kind of futilely. I'm actually kind of surprised I didn't burn out my heater, right? Because I don't imagine those things are meant to be going for 8 hours, 10 hours at a time, just full blast, because it can never get the garage to temperature.
Especially in the area of the country we live in, right? It's a big gas heater though, right? It's a garage heater.
It is. Yeah, it sits on the ceiling. It's a big gas heater on the garage, but it just, it just went all night, and that was unfortunate. So, but part of the getting back to how I do it in the house in general, I do have a smart thermostat in the house, or smart, let's say a Zigbee powered one called the Centralite Pearl. However, I don't really have it do anything with the temperature. I simply use it as an additional sensor. So what actually is happening is the temperature gets set on the thermostat to whatever lowest that I can set it at in the wintertime, and something reasonable in the summertime. Because for some reason in the wintertime, it doesn't actually let me set the temperature lower than 70 degrees in the house. I don't know why. It just doesn't let me do that. You can click and click and click, and it just stops at 70. So at any rate, I use the sensor on the Centralite thermostat, the temperature sensor coming back into Home Assistant, and I have other temperature sensors around on the main floor that I gather the data from. And this was also an oopsie. I used to only gather it from a temperature sensor in the kitchen. And one time while we were away, the kitchen sensor battery died.
Oh.
Yep. And it got a little cold. Fortunately, was kind of monitoring. I do monitor whether the temperature has changed or like whether it's extreme changes or whatever. I just get a ping saying like, hey, go check the thermostat, like something weird's happening. So I caught it after a couple of days and identified what the problem was. But so now I check the Centralite because it's plugged in all the time. And even if it's not super accurate, it's enough to know that, hey, the house is not, like the pipes are not going to burst or something like that. So I take the measurements from multiple places, and I basically just use the thermostat itself as an on-off.
I love that. You know, so the interesting thing, when you first did it, I was like, huh, interesting. That's one way to do it. And I just replaced my thermostats with essentially smart Honeywell thermostats, and it's worked fine, so I haven't really gone back to change it. But the other part of it is that the way my house is heated is different from the way that many houses are heated. So most houses have like a gas-fired furnace, and it has a little torch, and the torch burns, and then there's a blower that blows air past where the gas is blowing the torch, and it takes that warm air and pushes it in through a forced air system. Is that kind of how your heater works in your house?
I believe so.
So the way that my heater works in my house is a little bit different. And the way that my heater works is it's actually I have a gas-fired, furnace, but instead of heating air and then blowing the air around, instead it heats water. And it boils the water specifically to about 200 degrees. And then it pumps that water around in a series of pipes around the house. And those pipes come out in all manner of different ways. They're built into the wall, into big cast iron radiators. They are in the floors. So the bathrooms, the heat is actually coming out of the floor. And then it's not exactly concrete, but it's kind of like concrete that's poured underneath the floor to give it some mass. When the heat comes in. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to that system. The advantages are it's incredibly efficient because I can turn the heat off, and for 6 hours or 7 hours, those radiators will continue to give off heat. And so it is an incredibly efficient way to heat. And the specific heat of water is obviously much higher than air, and so it retains heat much better and all those sorts of things. The downside to it is I wouldn't go as, I'll stop short of saying it's impossible, but it's definitely not usable to do wide temperature differences. So you can't do the thing where it's like, well, I want it to be 70 between this hour and this hour, and I want it to be 60 between this hour and this. You kind of have to pick a temperature and leave it because it needs to maintain, and it takes hours to adjust one direction or the other. And so you really, it's not very agile by way of changing temperature. And so if you want a very cost-effective way to heat a house, and the other thing I would say is maybe a downside is there is a little bit more by way of maintenance. After living there for a while, I have learned how to do most of that myself. And once you get your head wrapped around how the system works, so there's a value. Basically, the short version is you don't want to crack the floors. And if you take 200 degree water and put it into a 50 degree floor, it's going to crack. And so there is a valve, a mixing valve that essentially slowly introduces it a few degrees at a time. As the water circulates around it, it warms up. And then there's the pumps, and you have to maintain those. But I went from a house that was half the square footage into a house that's double the square footage, and my energy bill dropped by $150 a month because it was so much more efficient than the forced air system that I had, that even heating twice the amount of space is significantly less money. So there are things I really like about it, and if I was to redo it, I would absolutely do the same thing over again. But all that to say, I don't change my temperature, and so for me, just setting it in one place, it really doesn't matter. It's fine. As I have gotten the opportunity in my professional career to go around and work in larger buildings and work in newer apartments and really super expensive houses, what I'm learning is they all do it your way, Steve. Nobody is putting just thermostats on the wall and controlling it there anymore. In part because just because the place that we put the thermostat, sometimes the place you want to have the thermostat to control the temperature ain't the place that you really gets you a real reading of what the house is. Number one. Number two, it can change pretty drastically depending on what doors are open and what doors are closed. It can change pretty drastically depending on who's standing around the thermostat, or if you have a fireplace on, or if there are all manner of different, somebody leaves a door open. There all manner of things can kind of affect what the air around the thermostat is, as opposed to what the temperature around the entire house is. And so for that reason, a lot of the newer systems are going to your method where you have just temperature sensors all over the place, and then it measures and then it extrapolates and says, so based on this, the temperature of the house is X or Y. The other part of it is I'm increasingly noticing, and mind you, I'm not talking about nerds here. I'm not talking about Home Assistant users. I'm talking about average sheeple that are living inside of their homes. They don't get up to adjust the thermostat. You know what they do, Steve? They pull their phone out of their pocket and they open up the requisite app, and then they dial in whatever thermostat temperature that they want. So let me ask you, can you pull your phone, assuming that you carried your phone in your pocket, which I know that you don't, if you were to pull your phone out of your pocket and open up do you have a requisite app that you could open up and adjust the thermostat in your house?
Home Assistant?
Yeah. So the same app that you're using for your light automation, the same app that you're using for security, the same app, it's one thing to rule them all, which at least in my house goes a long way from the spousal approval factor when I can say, this is the one app you need to install. This is the one place you need to go. And then the entire house will work off of it. That has gotten me so many husband points. It almost makes up for the fact that I locked my wife out of the laundry room with a fob system. The third thing is, if we were going to recommend a thermostat, I think we're still going to stick with the Venstar T7900. It is still kind of a go-to in Home Assistant circles, enthusiasts. The people that have them really, really like them. Steve, tell me why you pulled yours off the wall and why it now sits on a shelf.
Because I have a gremlin in my Wi-Fi. That's probably the best way to put it. My Venstar would drop off the network, or it would look like it's attached, but then you would try and send it commands, and Home Assistant said, yep, I sent it commands, and you could be standing right at it and nothing would change. So sometimes you had to boot it off or re-add it or whatever, and it just was slightly inconsistent. But at one point I had even made an access point just for the thermostat. I am 95% sure it is a problem with the Wi-Fi in my house and not the specific make and model, given the widespread love for this device. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it worked fine for the first year or two that we were here, and as with everything else, just seemed to go bizarre as, I don't know, the gremlins just moved in and took over my network.
I am not saying this because I have failed to provide you an adequate Wi-Fi solution, but I don't like things that work off of Wi-Fi for a variety of reasons. One is, if it's a network device, now we're talking about security and updates and all of that. Second of all, if it's a network device, Wi-Fi in general is the place you know before you ever connect, before you ever even take it out of the box and plug it in. It's the one device you know that is going to have competition for our spectrum space, right? Every person that walks through your house is going to have a device. And frequently, if you have a family of 5 people that come over, you might have 10 new devices that have Wi-Fi radios that just turned on because everybody's got a phone and a tablet or a laptop and a phone or whatever. And so to me, it just doesn't seem like the scalable good way to do things. I feel like if you're planning things, go to one of the very many design things that are for automation. So that would be Z-Wave, that would be Zigbee, and then there's a bunch of proprietary license ones. But though, stick with something there, and that will work really well. If I recall right, Steve, your wireless temperature sensors, those are Z-Wave?
My wireless ones are actually Zigbee.
They are Zigbee. Okay.
The ones that are inside the house with the screens on are Bluetooth. So
okay.
I have not found a Z-Wave one, although every other sensor that I have is either Z-Wave or slowly rolling over to it.
Yeah. So hopefully that answers your question. If you have, now my information is a bit dated here, and I'll explain why. I put a Honeywell RedLink system in. At the time that I put it in, I was very happy with it, and I still to this day use it, and I still really like it. But what Honeywell has changed in the time that I put it into where I sit here and record this episode today is when I put it in, everything was local. And so you bought a little device that you could plug into your network, and it could speak RedLink to the thermostats and to the thermostat, what is called the Equipment Interface Module, or EIM. And it could talk to the EIM, and then it would just give it an IP address, and you could talk to it from Home Assistant or whatever you like. I'm told that the newer version requires some sort of cloud account activation thing, which would be a hard no for me, especially for something as critical as controlling the temperature. And like I say, increasingly, I'm seeing less and less people walk up to the wall and adjust the temperature. They're all doing it from an app anyway. So at that point, kind of what's the point? Our second email comes in from Anonymous. Anonymous writes in and says, "Hi, guys. I'm sure many listeners use AI and would like to have more privacy. The Signal founder has recently released an encrypted chat assistant. I'll be testing this out to see how it works. Thanks for having a great, informative show." So, Steve, I'll just ask you plainly, would you trust this? Would you trust a thing? I mean, Moxie Marlinspike is a well-respected security person who has a long track history of open source security and I believe has the admiration of one Edward Snowden, who said he would use anything that this company produces. So, Whisper Systems. So that being the case, does Steve Ovens trust him?
I generally go with the principle of if I don't want it on the internet, I don't put it on the internet, right? So there's it's not that I think that anyone like Duck AI or Proton's AI or even the Signal AI is going to necessarily store my data. But there's always an issue of the training data and whether they say they're going to do it or not. Sometimes we find that information slips through the cracks. It got trained on it, or somehow it squeaks out in ways that we don't anticipate. There's been a lot is too much. That's hyperbole. There have been a few breaches or leaks of big company data because some data somewhere got in a training set or got hoovered up into the data set that it is using, and people were able to accidentally or on purpose extract the information out of the AI about these companies. And so because of that, if it's private enough that I'm actually concerned about not putting it on the internet, then I'm just not going to take that chance. It
does seem like it's an interesting thing that we've chosen to split the binary, right? There was a time where, and I believe you and I both grew up this way, there was private stuff and there was public stuff. And there was private stuff that if you cared about it, you encrypted it and kept it on a disk somewhere. And then there's public stuff, the stuff that you put on the internet. And you said it very succinctly. If I didn't want something to get around on the internet, I just wouldn't put it there to begin with. And we've blurred that line. And now we're trying to wade what I think is a pretty dangerous path of saying, here's the parts of the internet that we can trust and here's the part that we can't. And I'm not sure what I think of that approach. But let me ask you this, would there be an opportunity, I'm phrasing the question this way. What would be wrong with taking the entirety of AI and bringing it offline and using it there? Is that a practical approach?
So it depends on what your use case is and what you're trying to achieve. And the reason for that is because a lot of these things require additional help in order to be maximally useful, right? If you took a local AI and gave it to somebody 6 years ago who had never experienced what ChatGPT or pick your favorite AI is capable of doing, they would think it's amazing. But when you take that high level of expectation of someone who has used these things and then you throw a local AI at it, they're often disappointed. And a large reason for that is because, first of all, you can't run the same size of model as what's out there, which means all number of letdowns because it just doesn't have the same data. Second of all, a lot of these things can actually, they have additional help that they can get in the back end, whether it's MCP servers or additional agents to go out and fetch some information and all that sort of stuff. And so because of that, you have to set your expectations appropriately. And I have a hard time coming up with a reason why I would use a local AI for something ultra private. Like we're not talking about the ethics or anything like that. We're talking about specifically to keep something that I care about private, something I wouldn't put on the internet, and I'm trying to keep that private. I have a hard time coming up with a use case where I would also want to involve an AI in that mix.
Yeah. And as you, I think, correctly pointed out, it's not with AI, it's a bit more insidious because not only do you have to trust that it isn't connected to the internet, you also have to trust that it isn't necessarily leaking the information about the information, which is, I say it's particularly insidious because it, in a lot of ways, bypasses existing law. We have laws to say that you can't take information you don't have access to. We don't really have any laws that say you can't train a computer on information that you don't have access to and then take that computer out. That's not a thing yet.
Yeah. So I'm not disparaging local AI. I think it has a place. I just think that I have yet to come across a reason specifically around privacy that I would also then decide to use an AI. Like we're not talking about a local AI for coding so that I save costs or so that I don't, leak some proprietary code out there. We're talking about something that is presumably dealing with very private data, and I'm not sure why I would feed that to it. Like I'm just not quite sure what the use case is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so talk to me about this. So in the case of, let's say I don't want it to be private. Let's say I don't need it to be private. It's fine. I'm willing to put it on the internet. Now I'm just looking for the least egregious place to go through on the internet. And I guess I want to start with Duck AI. Have you used, when you go to DuckDuckGo, have you used what they call their search assistant, and what do you think of it?
I have. Generally speaking, I think that it is. So I'm an avid user of Perplexity. Now, this is not an ad for them, but as a way of comparison, I pay for Perplexity's Pro tier. And so because of that, my mindset, like we were just talking about, is based on what does it perform like and how does it do. And whenever I am evaluating something else, I am inherently judging it based on the experience that I live every day. And so because of that, I find that Duck AI is okay. It is, I would say it is mediocre relative to my experience with how I use Perplexity.
Do you self-host it, or you said you pay for their pro thing?
I pay for their pro plan.
The thing that I have found Duck AI to be helpful with, or their search assistant, is there are times where I want the answer to a particular question and I don't, how do I phrase this? I want the answer to a particular question. I'm not willing to trust the AI with the answer. So I can't just take it from AI and then just repeat it verbatim. But I also don't want to go through the work of digging through a bunch of things. And so in that, I suppose, somewhat unique mix, I found the search assistant to be really helpful, where I ask it a question, it gives me the answer, and then gives me the links where it got that answer, and then I can go to those links and independently verify. And I bet you, Steve, I have to be 80-90% of the time, what it says is there. Every once in a great while, it will do the thing where the thing is mentioned, but it's mentioned either in the negative, so it actually, the answer is the inverse of what it thought it was, or I just can't figure out how it's obtaining the information that it thinks it's getting from a site. And so then I have to disregard it. But for the most part, I have found it to be a pretty solid time saver. And I was having a conversation, and I think you might recognize what I'm talking about, where some young people were saying they stumbled into it. They went to DuckDuckGo to go do a thing and then got into an interaction with it. And it was of note to me that we are starting to build AI into systems that even when we tell people like, hey, go to DuckDuckGo, it's privacy by default, those sorts of things. I'm glad to see that even if we didn't like it, even if we said this isn't the best solution, it's not a one-to-one with Perplexity, for example, at least there are companies that are trying and they're starting to put things out there so that people don't feel like if I go the private route, if I'm only using Signal, if I'm only using DuckDuckGo, I have less than. Right? You still have access to AI. It just might not be as good.
I guess the point is depending on what you're doing with it, right? Like, so I use Perplexity like a research assistant fairly heavily. And so from that perspective, I do use Duck AI in the search assist, especially even when it's toggled off. I will actually reformulate my query and then hit the search assist because, like you, I found it good for what it does. But if you're talking about being a general purpose AI, that's where I find it to fall down. I think it does a good job as a search assistant and it's mediocre as a general purpose.
I love it. 1-855-450 Noah. It's 855-450-6624. The email live@asknoahshow.com. Our third email comes in from Faye. Faye writes in and says, "Hi Noah and Steve, longtime listener from France. Love the show, and I learn a lot with you guys. First point is for Steve. I run Image via Portainer on a Proxmox VM. Portainer runs in Watchtower, so it updates Image by itself alone. It's been running for almost a year and a half, no issues. No luck there for you, I guess. So, Steve, give me an update of where we're at with Image in the Ovens household."
So Image is, we'll say, on life support. It I had some minor malfunction with it that I fixed between upgrades, which wasn't that big of a deal. But honestly, I can't remember the last time that we used Image for anything in the last 2 to 3 months. We largely keep it online because we found that if we're looking in the archive of pictures, having both those to search from is going to yield a better result in terms of actually digging up what we want. So at first, I was very solidly in the camp of Image does better search. And after a time, we actually found that it depends on what you're searching for, whether it does a better search or not. And so it's around for its searching capabilities, but we're definitely not, like, nobody has it on their phone or anything like that. If we're going to search it, we go to a web browser and pull it up.
So I'll give you an update on on kind of where we were at. So I had not updated in a little while, and I was getting to the point where they had gone to their full-on production release now. For a long, long time, if you used it, it would give you this message that would say, not for production use, we're not ready yet, all those sorts of things. So they're on the other side of that. And so I needed to get myself up to date. So I had a friend who is just absolutely, he was the guy that told me about Image and has been using it basically since the project launched and has the update comes out and it basically, I think the moment the bits hit the internet, they're down on his server. That's how close he is to the thing and just is obsessed with it. So I was like, hey, your baby, come over here and help. And so the process and you actually pointed this out, Steve, and we essentially just followed this, but just reading the release notes, and they are really good about pointing out to say breaking changes. They put it in red, so it's really easy to skate to the thing. And basically what we did was we skipped a whole bunch of updates, but we went to the ones that had the breaking change, read them carefully, did exactly what they said to do, and then updated to that version, then skated past the bunch of the other versions. So we got to the next one, breaking changes, did that until we finally worked our way up to current. And we were able to successfully do it. And so far, so good. So it continues to be a thing. Again, and I think you kind of called me out on this when we were hanging out last weekend. It's really not anything I struggle to get really excited about it. If I'm going to pull a picture up on my phone, I find myself just opening the gallery. I don't know. I don't really need access to all of those other images. The other thing is, my phone is somewhat a piece of utility for me, I should say the camera on my phone is somewhat a piece of utility for me. So, there's, let's say for every 5 cute, adorable kid pictures, there's 150. Where does that wire run? How does this put in? Oh, where's this thing? And that's what that rack looks like. Here's the back of this piece of equipment. What's the serial number there? And so scrolling through my phone it's a lot of, I don't want to say garbage because I do need it, but it's certainly not fun to, to look at. And so I don't know. I really struggle to find enjoyment in, and it's more of a me thing than a reflection on the image or anything else. But all that to say, it continues to do what I need it to do, which is it gives my wife a way to automatically back up her photos on her phone, which was kind of the goal, kind of what we're aiming for. So, you have kind of gone a different route, and that's gotten a lot of traction. Tell me a little bit about NT for people that haven't been following along.
So NT is, we'll call it an image competitor. It serves a similar market, but not exactly the same, right? So I found, having not been a Google Photos user, I found Image to be full of options, and that's fine, right? But at the same time, I wanted a photo album that I could have on my phone, and that's essentially it, like a photo album that you could search. And so NT is, you can self-host it or you can pay for them to host. We do both. I use the paid version to back up. So let me step back. Mm-hmm. NT has clients for everything, including Linux. And so what this allows me to do is I have 2 machines set up. One that is just constantly exporting the self-hosted NT into a directory. And it does this, and it creates folders for all of the albums that we have. And it's just constantly doing that. And it's just nice to have the files that way. Now, the reason why you would do this is because NT uses object storage, which means that unlike Image, where you could go look at the files on the disk, it is using object storage. And part of the reason for this is because the cloud offering is end-to-end encrypted on both sides. So the blobs are encrypted before they even go up there, to include most of the stuff in the database, which means that they can't look at your stuff even if they wanted to. Because of this design, the files are not just kind of hanging around on the disk. And so if you want to have those files, those pictures backed up in another place, you can use the client to just constantly, it even has a little tick box that says something like continuously export or something like that. Then I have another client that is plugged into the cloud version of NT, and it just watches that directory. And as they get dumped from the self-hosted version, it goes up to the cloud as an additional app. And we really like this. It has worked quite well for both my wife and I. We like that we get memories that are pushed to us. That's really nice. You get the on this day, and the slideshows in NT I found really nice. I really like them. And there was just some little touches here and there. Now, I will admit that I was not a heavy user of Image, and so it's possible that they also do a slideshow kind of thing. But the reason why the push notification for the slideshows is good is because there's a byproduct of having iOS and trying to work within all of the weird Apple stuff when it comes to syncing. And one of the things that you need to do is constantly be interacting with the app, or else Apple will first deprioritize it and then simply remove it and kill it. I don't mean uninstall it. It will just kill it from the background. And this was the problem with Image. This was the problem with NextCloud, is that because she wasn't interacting with it, eventually the sync would die, and there isn't anything that you can do about that other than interact with the app, because this is just how Apple is managing third-party things. Mm-hmm. Because we get these push notifications, she's constantly in NT. And I also find that she'll walk up to me and show me the slideshow of whatever, and we have like a shared bonding moment, which is kind of nice, because we look back at the pictures together because it struck somebody's fancy. So we just really like NT. It's simple. It honestly, if you looked at it and you've come from Image and really like all the knobs, you're going to feel constrained by this. For me, I like it. I want to upload the images. I want to have an album, and I want to be able to search, and I don't need to do anything other than that. But we are using some things, like there's a quote hidden or locked area. I know that Image has recently added that as well, but we use that as well. That's kind of nice, because any photos that you just don't want to accidentally appear in the, like when you open up your timeline or whatever, like if you don't want it to make a on this day in history and pull, images from whatever. It doesn't matter what they are. Like receipts, for example, go in there. Because why? You might need to keep them, but you don't. Why would you have them show up in this day 4 years ago? Sort of.
On this day, you spent $147 on chicken at the grocery store.
Exactly, right? So, big thumbs up from NT. It got the spousal approval, and then it stuck.
I love it. So, do you see this being any overlap with, we've talked about paperless before, and the ability to, okay, so I need to digitize my receipts, that sort of thing, or different tool for a different job?
So what you're kind of alluding to is NT has, it's got 3 different, we'll call them products, right? It's got NT for photos. There's NT Auth, which is actually how my gateway started, because I've been using NT Auth for quite a long time for my 2FA stuff, my OTP stuff. And then it's also got something called Locker. And Locker is for storing like sensitive private documents and stuff like that. I haven't looked into it much more than just like, hey, that's neat. I saw the product announcement and I thought that was kind of interesting. So that's kind of what you're referring to, is that Locker sensitivity document thing. And I think that they play different roles, right? So paperless is more about storing, organizing, categorizing, tagging, and searching whatever it is that you're going to store, receipts or emails or whatever it is. And this is more about sensitive documents that has a succession planning built into the app and stuff like that, so that in case of emergency, your spouse can get into whatever she needs to get into, that sort of stuff. So I see them in kind of playing in different spaces still.
1-855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email live@asknoahshow.com. So the emailer continues, says, I have a Proxmox server and a NAS server. Portainer on the Proxmox mount where the NAS server stores all the apps and Docker gets all the data. My issue is when there's a power outage or reboot or a restart, how do I make sure that the Proxmox server waits until the NAS server is online before starting everything? I had an issue where the Proxmox server was faster rebooting than the NAS, and then all the servers lost their configs and rewrites the data locally instead of to the NAS. So, Steve, how would you solve that problem if somebody came to you and said, with your architect hat on, how do I make sure this thing starts up before that thing?
Yeah, I would take a look at using systemd units. So I'm not super familiar with Proxmox, although I understand you can get into the underbelly of it when because it's just Debian underneath. So I would look into making the systemd unit. So first of all, I would have my mounts on Proxmox come through as NFS mounts in systemd, so that I can actually test to make sure that they're there and systemd is aware of them. Then anything that depends on those mounts, you would make a requirement for. So inside of the systemd units, you can actually say depends on or requires, and then give it a specific thing. And so I would have Docker hold until those mounts have existed or confirmed to exist. And you might have to write a shell script for this, but that is the route that I would go. What would you do?
Probably the same. I like the idea of the thing that's nice about systemd. First of all, I like the idea of everything being a systemd unit. I previously didn't do it that way. I previously did everything in fstab, and I found that it's way better from a logging perspective. It's way better from a you need options, or you need to be able to control when this thing happens or when that thing happens. It's more interactive. All of those things are just better. And so if you're doing it that way, then this becomes a really easy thing to step into. The third thing they ask is, they say, all of my data is currently on the NAS. The NAS takes snapshots and sends it to a remote NAS at my parents' house daily. Is that good enough? So, Steve, talk to me about snapshots. What is the inherent flaw with using snapshots exclusively for backup, or using backup exclusively via snapshots?
So there's a couple of things that could happen, and it's inherent to any online backup system, whether it's a snapshot or an rsync or what have you. So if you have some sort of critical failure in your data, let's say you got ransomware and you weren't paying attention, right? There are a confluence of errors that would have to happen. You'd have to get the ransomware, and then you'd also have to not catch it in time before your backups, before your snapshots are overwritten. But you could potentially end up with a situation where your snapshots on both ends contain bad data because you didn't catch it. Okay. So while ZFS or B3FS try to work on making sure that you're not going to have bit rot, generally speaking, they're not going to prevent you from, say, going into a Word doc and deleting a bunch of stuff and then saving it, because that looks like regular activity. But users will do that, or they'll accidentally delete a file or whatever it is, right? And if you're just relying on the snapshot, first of all, you have to make sure that you're going to catch that and that you don't overwrite good data with bad data. The other thing that could happen, and granted, in a home situation, this is low, like a low opportunity, but if one side or the other gets breached, the attacker could identify the fact that there is an off-site backup, and there's obviously some communication that happens between them. Now, if you've got a security team behind you, there's all kinds of ways to lock this down. If you're really in the know of how to dial down the privileges, this becomes slightly less of a problem. But essentially, if you've got a quite obvious backup server somewhere and the information is flowing and you haven't locked that down properly, it does allow someone to get at both copies of online data. When you have offline data, such as a tape or even a hard drive that you just don't leave plugged in, power surges or cryptoware or any of those sorts of things are less of a threat, because you have to take the active task of turning it on, mounting the tape, writing to the tape, then rotating the tape out, or the same thing with the hard drive. And so that little bit of friction provides you that much extra, protection is not the right word, but let's say the extra feel goods that you've probably got your data in multiple places, ideally stored in different forms, so that if there is a problem, you have the chance to catch those.
100%. Do you, I know because we've gone back and forth a couple of times with emails, all things in the emailer who wrote in to say, I'm thinking about going to tape. Do you believe that is the right route for them, again, after kind of going back and forth, or would you say that still there's better options than tape?
No, I never disliked tape for them. My question was about whether or not writing a file system like ZFS to the tape drive is the appropriate way, and
approach.
It really could be. We'd really have to dig into it, but no, tape is. I have no problem with tape, especially because it's a perfect offline backup in terms of, like, you're not going to bump a tape and ruin its head, for example, right? There's always ways to ruin devices, but unless you're going to take a magnet to both of them, tapes are pretty safe to store long term.
Talk to me about storing data in three places. Why? How does that play into this?
Well, so generally speaking, a backup, if you simply have a second copy, that is a copy, not a backup, right? And so part of this is there's the 3-2-1 strategy. You should have 3 copies in 2 different places, and ideally you have at least one different format that you are working with. So ZFS and a regular file system, or a tar and a snapshot, or something like that. And part of that is just access to the data. Some of it is the fact that you're guarding against a bug in one thing or the other. So part of the reason why BSD has such a good foothold on the internet is because it is guarding against having a homogeneous environment, so that a bug in Linux's version of Apache doesn't just go and take down the entire hosting, right? So there's a lot of value in having a heterogeneous strategy when you're talking about protecting yourself from bugs or accidental deletions or all of those sorts of things. So ideally you have these things in 3 places and you're protecting against bit rot.
Fourth thing, they write in and say, I have been running mail in a box on a VPS for the past 4 years. I've never had an issue. There are some small little things, like mail sent from the server may appear in the junk folder of the recipient, and the code sent for 2FA sometimes takes 15 minutes to arrive, and that's too late. I need to resend the 2FA a couple of times to get them. I want to say that we very cautiously rolled out mail in the box, in part in response to Microsoft shutting down a feature in Office 365 that allowed people to connect their copiers to Office 365 so that you could scan to email. And our thought process was essentially, hey, if this goes down, it's not going to be the end of the world, and it'll be kind of a nice way to test hosting email. And I have to tell you, we've had exactly zero problems. It's been a wonderful experience. Mail in a box has been a wonderful experience. In fact, the only thing that I regret, or the only thing I'm left wanting, is I wish it were set underneath NextCloud. NextCloud has a mail app. If they just set mail in the box down underneath, there are a lot of really good ways that it overlaps and could be that back-end thing that fits everything. So, if you're considering hosting, self-hosting mail, and this comes from a person who has previously said on the show many times, I don't know how I feel about self-hosting email. I have to tell you, we've dipped our toes into it, and it's been nothing but pleasant. The fifth thing, they say, the services that I run locally, Vault Warden, Image, AdGuard, Paperless, Trafic, Portainer, and Watchtower. I'm wondering, what about Vault Warden and maybe pay for Bitwarden? I'm afraid that if one day my server crashes, I'm stuck with no passwords and no access to anything. Thought about writing up a small email about Image, and it ended up being a long one with multiple pieces of feedback. In any event, have a great show. Thanks, Faye. So, Steve, what do you think? Do you think it's dangerous to self-host your own password manager?
If you're willing to take that on, it's no more dangerous than self-hosting your pictures or anything else that you consider very important. Is it something that I do? No.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I basically divide my passwords into two things. Back to our earlier discussion about if it doesn't need to be on the internet, don't put it on the internet. Those passwords go in KeyPass. And then if it's already on the internet, that is to say it's a service, it's a login to a cloud service, whatever, then why not put it in Bitwarden? It's already on the internet, apart from my control, so I may as well make my access to it easier. Our fourth email comes in from HJ. HJ writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. I'm looking for NextCloud alternatives. I love the project, but I find it recently hard to configure and upgrade. Troubleshooting issues are sometimes complex when they occur. It's very slow, if not fine-tuned on the server. Any thoughts or help would be appreciated. I love the show, HJ." So let's work our way backwards. The thing that I think you're not going to get any argument from Steve or myself, it is abysmal right out of the box. If you just download their little basic NextCloud thing, it is appropriate for testing NextCloud to see how it works and click around the web UI. But I would agree with you, and I think Steve would agree with you, as soon as you start to put a load on it out of the box as it's defaultly tuned, it's not great. Has that been your experience as well, Steve?
It has. Although, honestly, I've been using this so long, and my previous life before Red Hat was working at a company that hosted websites. So I had, let's say, a professionally vested interest in tinkering around with this stuff to begin with. So I figured out early on the sort of stuff that I wanted to do, and so I haven't really looked back.
I would also second your observation that troubleshooting issues are complex when they occur. So anytime, and increasingly, we are moving towards this idea of microservices, right? And the more that we move towards this idea of microservices, the more little bits and bobs that have to be functioning for the entire stack to run. And if one little bit or bob breaks, the entire stack breaks, and that can be frustrating. So I understand where you're coming from, and I agree with where you're coming from. If I'm honest with you, it's the first part of your email that I'm struggling to resonate with. So you find it hard to configure and upgrade. Can you talk to me a little bit, Steve, about how you configure and upgrade your NextCloud server?
I am one of those barbarians that goes and grabs the zip file or the tarball. I think they only produce a zip. But either way, the compressed version of files on a disk, and I extract it, and I change my symlink, and then I restart Apache. And that's about the total... the sum total of what I need to do. Obviously, you have to make sure that your configurations are in place. But again, it's one of those things that as my configuration is external, it really is just as simple as like untar the thing, move a file, restart Apache. And I've been doing that for years. And again, we've long documented on the show how Steve has to really be encouraged to change a pattern of behavior that has worked forever, because I guess I'm Red Hat's target audience. So.
Yeah, boy, I never thought about it like that, but you're right. A stable, run forever kind of guy. Steve LTS.
Yeah, really.
So I have gone to doing it with a playbook, and if I'm honest with you, I just ripped it off for what we're using at Altispeed, and that's what I use personally, and it's worked pretty well. I aspire to someday find the time or find the resources to make some of those things public, but certainly if that's something you're interested in, reach out and I'll make sure you get it. The three things I would leave you with are the problem with finding an alternative, and there are some out there, but I don't know that we talked about it before the show, and I did a little bit of looking. I found a Reddit link that has some alternatives to NextCloud. I mean, you can find it by Googling, but I really struggle to find anything that does what NextCloud does, as well as NextCloud does it. And then above and beyond that, as I'm looking through the places and people that use NextCloud, oftentimes it's not the base of NextCloud that really sells it to them. It's the add-ons that allow them to do things. And so my top add-ons are OnlyOffice, because it is literally a one-to-one for Microsoft Office, even for people that want the buttons in the same place, even for people that want all the formatting the same, even. OnlyOffice seems to work every time out of the box, no problem. So I would encourage you to check that out. The second thing is group folders, which it turns out to be a really helpful way to do collaborative stuff. So when you have the proverbial shared drive that everybody in the organization needs access to, instead of if you create a user and that person shares the file, then that user has to be the one to add permissions and those sorts of things, and it becomes convoluted pretty quick. And then if that person leaves, it's just messy. It's just not clean, right? It always has in parentheses that person's name, and it just is not clean. Group folders solves that problem entirely. And the third add-on is something called Impersonate. And as an administrator, I find this feature to be both terrifying and really helpful. Terrifying because of the security implications of it. Really helpful because when you're the person getting the request to say, hey, I need this to work, it's really helpful to be that person. So go ahead and check that out. Go ahead and I would consider those things. Maybe write back with some specific questions of what you're having problems with, and we'd love to see if we can help you out.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of February 22nd, 2026, here's the Linux and open source news. OpenTTD, better known as the open source version of Transport Tycoon, has released version 15.2. GNU Awk 5.4 is now available. Pipewire 1.6 is now out. DNF 5.4 has been released. And the KDE team has released Plasma 6.6. The KDE team has also addressed the false rumors spread by some that KDE is abandoning FreeBSD and other distros. The KDE team has clearly stated that KDE will not drop support for non-systemd systems. In distro news, Puppy Linux creator Barry Kay has released EasyOS 7.2. Sparky Linux 8.2 has been announced. Xubuntu has opened its 26.04 wallpaper contest for submissions from the community. And the Gentoo Linux project has begun transitioning parts of its infrastructure away from GitHub and towards Codeberg, a Git hosting platform built on open source principles. The move reflects growing concerns within parts of the open source community about centralized hosting, proprietary AI integration, and long-term platform independence. In open source security news, the open source AI coding assistant Klein CLI was targeted in a supply chain attack. This incident occurred during an approximately 8-hour window on February 17th. The compromised version was downloaded approximately 4,000 times before being removed. In open source AI news, OpenClaw security issues continue to rise, even as the SecureClaw open source tool debuts. BuzzDetect is an open source AI tool for listening to pollinators. And the open source game engine Godot is drowning in AI slop code contributions. The development team has stated, I don't know how long we can keep it up.
Thank you, JT. So one of the things that happens every year is a conference called the Southern California Linux Expo. It's one of my absolute favorite conferences to go to, and I routinely take my kids, my family, to this conference because they do such a great job at being welcoming and inclusive to people of all ages. So it's going to be at the Pasadena Convention Center, March 5th through March 8th, 2026. Now, here's some news. I'm not going to be able to make it this year. It turns out between some family commitments and some other things going on that I'm just not going to be able to make it out there this year. But I reached out to the folks at Scale and I said, hey, we still want Ask Noah to be there in spirit. And they said, well, let everybody know that you can use the code ANS for Ask Noah Show. That'll get you 40% off tickets. Please share that code far and wide. And we'd appreciate getting the word out about the Southern California Linux Expo. Again, Pasadena Convention Center, March 5th through 8th. It's an absolutely fantastic time in Pasadena, California. So if you have the opportunity, or if you're around in the California area and have the opportunity to attend, I highly recommend you do so. The music in our ears means we're out of time. I thank you for joining us. You can catch the show. We record it live every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central at AskNoahShow.com. You missed the show live? That's okay. You can get the entire back catalog by going to podcast.asknoahshow.com. There you're going to find a bunch of things. You're going to find the show notes. They go over all of the things that we went through during the show, as well as some of the stuff we couldn't get to, but are there for you to read on your own time. Want to get more Steve? He's on X at Linux Evans. You can find more about me, noahc.us, but we're back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central, AskNoahShow.com. Have a good week.